technology.
All right. So I like to pause for a few seconds just to allow.
Dramatic. I
But
like
I believe we're, excuse me, we're on.
sweet.
So, welcome to this week's Up Close. And it's happening right now live on the West Coast, Seattle, Los Angeles, for now. Um,
Yeah.
we'll see where John ends up.
Who
But,
knows, right?
right. So, my guest this week is John Faga, who's a UP alum, but he's also studied in a lot of places. We're going to talk about some of that stuff and get his opinion on some of the improv education stuff for people. But thank you for being on. I will come back towards the end of the show and talk about what we have coming up show wise. We do have classes that are going on. You can check those out or register for next quarter as well. And as usual, if you feel like so inspired to make a donation, then please do so. But I want to welcome John. Thank you so much for, again, doing this. We're kind of wearing kind of similar.
Yeah. Well, I'm wearing glasses now because I'm, needing them. So we look similar. But yeah, thanks for asking. That was great. It's
Right.
super good to be here.
I'm wearing glasses because they put them on me when I was like 11 years old and
That's right.
I wasn't allowed to take them off.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I started walking into walls and thought, better option.
so currently you're in Los Angeles,
Yep.
and we'll get to the various cities where you've studied improv in the different groups.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, and again, I pretty much start every one of these with sort of, how did you find improv? Where did you first see it? What inspired you to take a class, and the
Yeah.
origin story?
Yeah, well, it's funny enough. The actually seeing improv wasn't the origin story of it, and I didn't see a show until maybe my second or third class at UP. But what happened was I visited a buddy of mine up in New York, and this was in 2002, in like January of 2002, and we were hanging out and doing a lot of stuff, and then there was a party, like a late party at the UCB Theater in New York, and I mean it was fun, and there was a lot going on, but there was something about the energy of the room, the actual room itself, that I was just really drawn to, and I woke up the next day and I just knew that that's kind of what I wanted to pursue. And I knew obviously he was involved in comedy. I knew it was an improv theater. And so I knew all of that stuff. And I was just excited by the energy that was there. And so I was moving to Seattle that next month. So then when I moved to Seattle, I just searched out things. I think the two main things that I found were Just City and Unexpected Productions. And I just sort of did those searches and then found Unexpected Productions, and then just took a class with Jill Ferris, and she gave out Truth and Comedy. I went home, read that book cover to cover, and came back to the next class and said, "This is what I want to do for sure." And that was, yeah. And I, like I said, and the first Harold I saw, I could still remember the ending, and it blew me away because I forget the whole premise of the Harold, but I do remember that you came out at the end with this bird on your hand, and it was from sort of all the way back in the beginning, and then you brought this, and it was a perfect button, as it turns out, and it just hit everything right, and I was like, whatever that is, I want that.
So basically, Jill and I ruined your life.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. No, 100%. My life went in the toilet ever since that day. I'm divorced, I'm single, and I'm living in Los Angeles with homeless people. Thank you.
Right. You're welcome.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
So you began taking classes, and that's interesting because I mean a lot of people find improv through performance first, and go see shows and go, oh my god, this amazing these shows. But it sounds like you were attracted to the education part first before you kind of got involved and fell in love with the shows.
I mean, I was attracted to the energy first. First and foremost, I was attracted to whatever that energy was because I felt it in the theater, and then once in class, and I felt that uh, the sort of energy inside. I was really, I found that what I had seen in the theater kind of matched the reality when I was involved in it, even in a class or whatever. I found that the energy and the empowerment and I've always been sort of an intuitive person, and I found that intuitive energy was
Right.
it just spoke to me.
And did that follow through as you were doing your education, or were you like, oh, I was fooled? Ah.
Oh no, 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 and I would say 100%, and especially as we went through, and I mean, you and I have spent how many hours just talking about, I think, that particular thing.
Right.
And also marrying it to, which also was very attractive to me. And we've had a ton of conversations about the hero's journey and then improv and all of those things. And really Campbell's overall perspective, not necessarily just narrowed down to the hero's journey, but certainly that. And the idea that, but also that the energy of the room dictates the show. I mean, what I love about improv is, and especially now having done it for a while, it's the last sort of ethereal art form, and it's on stage, and it works best because when it's that one time, it can be recorded,
Right.
but it's probably not going to be as good because
Right.
it takes being a part of the energy of that room to really enjoy the performance of it. And
Right.
I'm a firm believer that as soon as you get a suggestion out there, the synapses are all clicking on that word or whatever it is, that energy starts to fill the room. And what I love about the education at Unexpected Productions, because I absolutely, this has been my experience, was that I was taught by everyone there, but I think you and I, again, a million conversations around this about, I think it works best when we kind of get ourselves out of the way and try to be a vessel to allow that energy to come through and out. And it's kind of like jump off the ledge and trust that the net will be there. And that I don't have to be the constructor of the net, that the net will literally be there. And
Right.
I've had enough experiences on stage saying and doing things that surely were not my idea, to know that when at its best, that is true. I've done a lot of shows where I didn't do that and I wanted to be Johnsville. But I will say, like, when I do jump off the ledge, that is the greatest experience of it. And I experienced that early on when I was doing shows, maybe we'll talk like Sisters of Sal and things like that. But when I was doing these things and these very early shows where I was just trying to get the feel for what happened, when I would reach out for something and trust it would be there, it always was, and was way better than anything I would have chosen on my own.
Right. Well, two things in regards to that. It's that idea of sort of what you're describing. I try to describe to students, and often will say, your job is to just be on stage, and the story or whatever wants to happen is like a wind that just blows across the stage, and you just happen to be standing in the wind, and your job is to then just try to execute that in a way that makes sense. Or the other example I use, which is probably a horrible example, is surfing. I said, what we're trying to do is learn the skills of staying on a surfboard. So, anybody can ride a really great wave. Well, I guess not a beginner, but it takes a really great surfer to ride a really kind of mediocre wave. And we, instead of learning about the skills of staying on a surfboard, all these improvisers around the world try to control the surf, like try to make the wave bigger or make the wave different, rather than go, here's the wave that you got, do what you can with it, ride it the way it wants to be ridden, right? And so I think that echoes in what you're saying about stuff, and that kind of runner's high that comes with that. Because when it works, yeah, it's like, wow, you just want to do it again.
Absolutely. And honestly, like beating the hell out of the game and these other things that will allow you to help construct a wave, are all great and fine. For me, the absolute joy is when I know that didn't come from me, or when I'm in the audience and I laugh because I'm thinking, God, that's exactly what I was thinking. And it's like, yeah, it is exactly what you were thinking.
Right.
And that's even as an audience member, I really am I try to be participatory in terms of keeping my focus in on what's happening, and really just because even as an audience member, it's a great opportunity to be part of a communal moment of conversation without ever speaking a word or getting up out of the seat. We're all invested and involved in this moment.
Right. So, and maybe you already answered the question about energy, But I'm just wondering what else about improv theater pulled you in, other than the people and the energy
Yeah.
and the storytelling that was happening on stage. Were there other things versus, say, scripted theater or something else, sketch?
Yeah, well, and I do love sketch, and I do love doing
Hmm.
scripted stuff too. But even then, when I write that stuff, I do tend improv completely informs how I write. I mean, what I like is that I'm John until I get up on stage, and then I'm what needs to happen next, you know. And usually it's some flavor of John, right? I don't know that I'm not exactly the biggest character performer in the world, but I wear my characters like a very loose garment. Uh, but but it is just the idea that that it is really in the moment. I think is very attractive to me. I'm also, I can be a little bit lazy, so there's no prep time for an improv show, but the and also that sense of community. I think of it too is really powerful, and folks that tend to want to pursue theater of this sort. It's very close knit, and I think I don't know, man. There's a lot of really amazing people that are involved in improv. That especially like if you go to festivals and things like that, and I find a lot of kindness in the community that I really dig, um, and just sort of sensitivity. I think that the community does tend to have a certain sensitivity to it that I really like. Um,
Right.
and yeah, I mean, and just the fact that it is really theater in the moment, that it really is theater, that hasn't yet been scripted, is very attractive.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you dove in completely. You took classes, you started founding groups and being parts of groups, and kind of dove in 100%. In hindsight, do you think that that was the only way to do it, was to jump in to the deep end of the pool? Or do you think, oh, if I had to do it over, I would do it incrementally or do it differently?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I came at it in my 30s, so I feel like I had so much in the jar that needed to be shaken out that my only option was to jump all the way in. I mean, I had found something that I intuitively also kind of felt like, ooh, I wish I had, not that I wish I had hit it earlier, but I could have done. In other words, my makeup is such that had I hit it earlier, I think I would still be doing it today, I guess, right?
Right.
And I had so much that I wanted to do with it that for me, the only option was to just dive all the way in. And I don't know if part of me was feeling like I made up for lost time, but it's kind of like where you found home and now you just want to explore every room of home. I mean, it's kind of cornball maybe, but that's really how I felt. I was like, wow, this is when I'm on the stage or when I'm thinking about this or when I'm doing this is the most joyous I feel. So I was,
Right.
except I guess when I was married and in love and all that stuff. I know, just in case Melissa watches, I loved you a lot. Yeah. So I don't mean to say that necessarily, but there was just my spirit had locked into this thing, and I wanted to really explore it.
Right. Normally, I would ask this question a little bit later in the interview, but it seems like it's been brought up, which is um, this idea of either, I guess, what was the earliest, wisest thing you came across that helped you and got, as a touchstone um, through your journey, and what was the thing that like me, wasted your time on, that like, ugh, why did I spend so much time thinking about that or thinking that that was important? Do you have those?
Well, I mean, the things that I mean, you and I would have a lot of conversations, and those guide to this day. I mean, a lot of what we talked about guide, and I would say I'm even more strengthened in some of those ideas, right?
Hmm.
I mean, when we started the Sisters of Sal, the one thing that was really great about that was that people were willing to meet once a week. So the idea of being dedicated to this art form is something that I appreciate, and I feel like that was great. And we just and the group kind of winnowed down to a core group of about 5 people. that were sort of dedicated to that idea and just looking for shows everywhere. So I really valued that idea of let's try to push this forward and let's really try to do the best that we can by meeting and really exploring it, not just as a fun thing to do, but really let's explore this. And I appreciated that vision of that. The other thing is that I'll take classes everywhere now, even now. I mean, I love taking classes. I love exploring new ideas. And that's something that I've never regretted. You know, I mean, just getting new perspectives, new ideas has always, you know, I want to remain forever curious about this thing. I mean, if I'm going to spend my time on it, I want to remain curious and
Sure.
explore new ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to come back to the UP experience, but while we're talking about education, I mean, you studied improv in Seattle, you studied it in Chicago, you studied it in Los Angeles, you've done a number of festivals around the world. So talk a little bit about that. I mean, I guess we have a lot of students who are watching this, and people who think about, oh, should I go to Chicago? Should I go to LA? You know, that kind of thing. What has been your experience in all these various educational environments?
I would say, yeah, do all of that. I mean, that's you know, I have yet to regret studying anywhere.
Right.
And even you know, there's some places where I thought, well, that's not necessarily my style, or that's not really for me. But I had to do that in order to learn that. You know, again, I mean, going to Chicago so being at UP was, you know, I now understand for sure that is the bedrock of what I'm interested in. But I kind of had to go to these other places to know that that's to proof of concept that was the bedrock of my desires, if you will. You know, so if I just did there, I was kind of, maybe I would still question, well, are there these other things that might better inform or whatever? But like when I went to Chicago, I mean, it was it was really, really great. And I mean, it's such a theater town, and they do. There's no brass ring, you know, necessarily. I mean, you could do commercials in Second City, and I suppose you could, you know, SNL and that kind of thing. But really, it was just let's do it to do it, and let's try to be great at it. And that's where I think Seattle too is that same concept of like let's do it to do it and be great at it. And then you know, LA, same thing. You know, I'm doing stuff at the Pack Theater now, and I love that let's do it to do it. Rich Sohn and Neil Dadandi do this show called Dingleberries on Monday nights, and it is. And I tell these guys this, I tell them this all the time. To me, it's the most interesting show in Los Angeles because they're willing to just follow and be in the moment of it. There's no let's be really sort of like over clever this idea or anything. Let's just really follow the moment of it in sort of joyful improv. And I don't, you know, I mean, it is, like I said, it is definitely for me, it's the most interesting show in Los Angeles. But you know, so for me, and I tend to be a traveler anyway, but the getting new and varied ideas is super helpful. The festivals too, especially the ones in Europe, where you find all of these really theater-based improv stuff that is so exciting, so unique, so joyous, so joyful. And then you meet all those folks and you just gain all these different perspectives. And I love the fact that there is, and you and I have talked about this, there's a little bit of a German flavor in Germany. There's a little bit of an Italian flavor in Italy and those things. And I know that some folks have tried to drill that out of them and say, nope, there's just this one particular theater's idea that we refuse to believe is not 100% usable. And that to me devalues improv.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you try to push out the cultural stamp of any, you know,
Yeah.
and people and their references and things like that. You know, I was talking a couple weeks ago with Roberta McGuire and then Rebecca Stockley, and both of them brought up, and Rebecca in particular brought up the notion of like opening ourselves up to lots of different cultural things, other than everything has to be a Hollywood movie, or everything has to be, you know, something that's, you know, American playwright or whatever it is, but really exposing ourselves to that, and then seeing that when you're at festivals. To me is great. Kind of going, wow, what is this German stamp, or what is the French stamp? You know, and even regional or city is pretty cool. And I would hate to lose that. And I think you're right that, well, I think teachers and groups go over and say, no, no, don't do that. Do it this way because this is how we do it over here. I think it's going to come back and bite us in the butt, so to speak. That we're going to just lose all these traditions, I think.
Well, yeah, and you know, I mean, the interesting thing, we'll see what happens after the COVID situation is over, because I feel like not the field of play is not going to be the same. I don't think, not in the same way. And some
Well,
of those, you know, go ahead.
no, definitely. I mean, and talking about LA to a certain extent, but definitely in Chicago. I mean, what's going on in the improv scene in Chicago? It's like, where's the dust going to settle? You know, like where's all this going to end up? We don't know. And I'm sure you're in talks to buy Second City, but
Yeah.
uh,
Mhm. And so far, I have not come close to a point. Yeah.
but I mean, yeah, it's interesting to see what's going to happen to a city that was so sort of, improv wise, sort of saturated and set in a certain way, and all of a sudden, boom, there's all this stuff that's in the air. And granted, there are theaters that are also plugging along, but such those kind of foundational places being gone. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what your take will be, say in a couple of years, hopefully after we're able to get back in a room together on the Chicago scene, because I think it's going to be totally different than what it was like when you were there.
I think so, or it could revert back. I mean, to me, Clark Street, IO was this beautiful, small, grungy. I loved it down to my shoelaces. You know, then when it converts into a larger, more, you know, a larger building to accommodate a larger scene. You know, I mean, is my passion for that kind of a thing the same? I don't know, but I like the fact that it's this small community of like-minded people that get together in a shitty, gross room to do wonderful things, you know. And like, if a bathroom is too clean in any theater, I'm like, you know. And that's how I judge a theater, is by the bathroom, you know. If you got enough money to clean your bathroom, what's going on here, you know?
Uh, I'm going to add that to my list of things to consider. Uh,
Yeah, right, right. But I mean, but it really is true. I mean, when I go, I love that sort of punk rock feel of improv, and that's also what drew me, is that ability of anarchy. You know, because no, you know, I mean, any punk rock band, even if they just learned their instruments, you know, 6 months ago, still have a particular idea in mind, and they have a direction and those kinds of things. So you need that kind of foundational training or whatever, but then use that to kind of topple
right.
the normative ideas, you know.
Well, it seems that improv thrives on this notion of let's put on a show versus kind of what's happened in the last few years, especially with some of these foundational groups where it seems like more of a corporate attitude has taken over, and how do we market this as a product versus just enjoy the process of doing improv.
And I think, you know, in some cases that's come along, you know, not let's devise a corporate structure, but you know what? This is popular enough where we need a corporate structure to keep it afloat. So I would say that it's not that it's always been such a diabolical idea. I just think that whenever you get into that, you can't help but fall into the traps of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And then let's talk a little bit about Los Angeles
Mm-hmm.
um, in your training there, because again, you studied pretty much everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and were exposed to a lot of different kinds of shows. Do you find that the scene in LA, with these different groups, it's kind of a similar attitude, or do you see very distinct attitudes based on where you're playing or based on where you're studying?
Like different places in LA, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely different attitudes, you know. And I would say that sometimes they are as a direct result of another place, you know, as often happens, you know, there's, you know, a resentment theater or something, you know. But, or like I have these set of ideas that I would like to get across that I don't think are being communicated, or they're in response to this theater just shut down. Now what do we do? Like when IO West shut down, there was a lot of conversation about what do we do? How do we keep some of these wonderful groups still performing? How do we keep those folks that were in the middle of training and continue to transition them to another place? And, there were a lot of people, and like Paul Valancourt started a small theater for a time, and I was doing stuff with him. And the Pack Theater had already started with Miles,
Right.
and Brian O'Connell, and so they tend to have started in response to something, and also they tend to start because like people from New York and Chicago have come out to LA and they want to be able to still perform. But in LA, what I would say is oftentimes the improv it has to take a second step to, well, I need to go to this audition, I need to go, or I got this gig or whatever it is. I mean, by this town's very nature, it has to be that way. And
Right. So it leans towards showcasing talent than necessarily doing organic stuff that.
for sure. I mean, I think both of those things are true. I think that some of the, some folks that, like, for instance, were doing shows in Chicago will do similar shows in LA. But there's also the classes are much more in mind with trying to showcase and get that on your resume. And then if you're on a team, you might not be able to make a show because you have an audition or you have a gig or whatever it is. Where in Chicago, your dedication to the team might be a little bit stronger. In LA, by this town's very nature, you kind of can't have that. Right? So you might have a coach that's like, I can't coach anymore because I've got to go do this television show, and you're like, well, you know what? Forget the television show, buddy. This is important. You know what I mean? That's not why you're in Los Angeles. And so, you have to accept some of that. And so it has a bit more of a looser thing. UCB, I think, being to some degree the maybe difference there. I think that I think the classes are very much, people take those classes to get on the resume and different things. But I think that I have seen, teams that started there did seem to last a long time and have, and iOS, come to think about it. There were teams there too that people were really dedicated to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you moved to LA, and we were talking about this before we came on. I think that you've been there for 12 years already.
Crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's bonkers.
It's not even it's scary, is what it is.
Yeah. Well, living in LA too, there's no season, so I haven't, all of a sudden I look in the mirror and I'm like, what just happened? How do I look this good? Yeah, no.
Right. So you've been there, and again, it's a sort of obviously the seat of a lot of show business stuff. And in the midst of that, you took a break from performing.
I did. Yeah.
Focused on writing and doing other stuff. And what, first of all, inspired that or brought that on? And then two, what brought you back to performing?
Yeah. I mean, what kind of prompted it was, I just was burned out, I think. I mean, you talk about the fact that I hit it really hard at the beginning, and I did not stop hitting it hard until I took that break. And, when I was at iOS, I was doing shows, 2-3 nights a week. For the first few years I was in LA, and then I was writing for a stage sketch show, and just doing these different things, and just doing a lot of sort of things to move that forward. And also, I mean, for me, I've just always felt most comfortable retaining a 9-to-5 job. That's always been my nature. And so as a result of that, I mean, that's just a lot of time. So I kind of got burned out. And
But was it gradual, or was there like a particular show or moment where you're like, I'm done?
It was gradual. It was gradual. Not that I didn't have that moment, but I came to that moment gradually, But also, I was just sort of burned out on John too. I mean, I was doing so many things, and I was sort of, to some degree, I was just like, okay, let's just shift focus into these other areas for a while,
Okay.
and it was good. I mean, I'm glad that I did that. And then what brought me back to it was we started to do these, actually mostly with you, but like doing shows, like we did the show I did a couple shows in Seattle. We went and did the shows in Chicago with Kristen, and then did the festival in Ireland. And those were all, Chicago and Ireland were both spoken, which is so close to my heart. And I remembered that I don't feel 100% whole unless I have this in my life. I feel like, you know, even if I'm doing other creative things, for me, the improv and being on stage just makes me feel more whole, I think. And that was what really hit it. And, you know, and I had stopped drinking, and, and so that, those couple years off were also, you know, exploring what that looks like was also part of that equation. So when I came back to it, you know, I had more sort of, I had time away from it, and then I had this sort of clarity of purpose, maybe that wasn't, you know, that wasn't as muddled as it might have been before, you know.
Right. And so it felt different when you came back?
Oh, totally, totally, yeah. I mean, and still does, you know. I mean, uh, yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, they say about getting those 10,000 hours, but on hour 10,000, you're like, fuck, I need a break. You know what I mean? And, you know, and hour 10,000 might not look as fun and great as it did at hour 300, right? So, but then coming back to it, you can't negate the fact that you have that time built up. And with a little bit of time, you could start to assess, well, what are my priorities with this? Rather than continuing down these paths or this path or whatever it is, what is it that I really want to do and get from it in those things?
Right.
And I think I have a different perspective, and I approach it. Oh, I certainly approach it differently. Yeah.
So what would you say the goal is now? Like when you can go back into a theater and do improv, um, what is it that you're looking for in terms of satisfaction or inspiration or
Yeah, I mean, well, what I'm looking for is just that in the moment, you know, I really what I really like is that in the moment theater. And so for me, chasing the laugh and those things, I love to get people to laugh, no question. But and this is something again that I learned at UP is like, if they're laughing, great. But if they're quiet, if you don't hear anything out there, they're with you.
right.
And that's the thing. I definitely hear laughs because you sort of want to modulate maybe add, you know, sort of energy and those kinds of things. But I'm listening for rustling. If there's no rustling, I'm still solid. I'm still on solid ground in the scene. Let's, you know, let's see what's happening. So I'm just looking for that. My friend Rebecca Lieb and I did a show. We thought we were going to do 10 minutes. We hadn't performed together for a while, and we thought we were going to do 10 minutes. And they're like, no, you get a half hour together. I'm like, oh, what the hell are we going to do? And I just sort of jokingly suggested, well, what if instead of telling people to turn off their phones, we just tell them to call us? And we sort of laughed, and we're like, no, let's do that. So we did. We gave out Rebecca's phone number, and we just started, and people were texting us, and we started to incorporate that into the show. At one point, I was out on the sidewalk. We were doing all these different things, half-hour show, and the idea, and we were just everywhere. Nothing was off limits, and I love that idea of sort of the anarchy of it, and pushing the boundaries of what, you know, what we think improv is supposed to be, you know. To this, well, no, you're supposed to beat the hell out of the game and then get off stage in 3 minutes. It's like, no, we're going to beat the hell out of whatever's in front of us. You know what I mean? And it turned out the wonderful thing is that as people were texting and piling onto story ideas, and then, you know, Rebecca as editor kind of was sort of looking at these things, and the audience was telling this great story, and all we had to do was justify it. So again, it shows that the audience is fully into this and probably is going to be a better storyteller if you take your hands off the wheel than we would be. And it was proof of concept right there. They were hilarious. They were great. We got the button from the audience. The whole thing was fantastic. And so that's what excites me. And doing things like Spoken too, where non-narrative is where I get the greatest joy, because it's not up to me to decide for you what the story is. I just give you these series of events, or we do as a group, right? We give you these series of events, and then you decide how the story went. And for me, Spoken, and you know, again, how many times have we talked to audience members afterwards, and their stories were completely different. And like you and I, or Jill, and you know, whoever, Kristen, and you know, we would talk, and our stories weren't the same.
Right.
and that's phenomenal.
Right.
So that's where I get a kick. That's what I'm looking for.
Well, I'm pretty fond of spoken too.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, in what you're talking about, and I've talked about it several times here and talk about it in class about the notion of being advocates for the audience, telling the story the audience wants to tell. And in a way, that form, when I created Spoken, the idea was to really give the audience all that power. And, and I genuinely have felt like talking to the audience afterwards as part of the show, like, tell us your story. The stories they came up with were so much better than anything I had going on for sure. Um, Stumbling my way through it. And that to me was that power of the audience, and us just being okay. Our job is to translate what the audience wants into theater, and that's our only job. It's not about me being creative or making something up or being perceived as being clever or funny. It's just all those other things happen. But job one is what's the audience want to see, and let's give them that. Um, you know, and like it's spoken, it's as I often describe it, it's like a jigsaw puzzle where the audience gets to decide where the pieces go. You just let them have whatever they have. That's why we don't try to define where the scenes happen in the arc of the narrative. Let the audience decide. So one audience member may go, "Oh, that happened 2 years before," and someone else goes, "Oh, that happened after the initial scene," and that's okay. That's right. That's correct. You're absolutely right.
And then the one thing that we did, because we basically we sat for a week and sort of constructed this thing and then took it on the road, and I remember towards the end of the tour, we kind of all sat around and we're like, okay, and I think this is a valuable idea. What are we as performers sort of falling into pattern wise? And one of the things that we saw was that we were breaking up with each other for dramatic effect. Like in other words, as performers, we are, I think, inherently looking for some sort of dramatic event that can better decipher. And so we'd agreed, let's not break up and let's just see what happens. And in the next show, you and I were a couple. And I said, I think we need to break up or get a divorce. And you said, really? And I went, no. and then that became interesting because as soon as I said no, we immediately got physically closer and we healed that relationship in that scene. So, there's wonderful things that can happen if we choose not to separate the ideas and have the dramatic separation, but look for ways to come closer. And that is, actually just did a show with Kevin Dorp was kind of teaching and coaching. And his big thing was, let's have 5-minute scenes, 2-person scenes. The idea is be physically close and, just stay in eye contact. And they have to be 5 minutes. So you need to stay in that thing and find reasons to be there. And that proximity, that physical proximity, absolutely causes genuine proximity of connection.
Yeah, it kind of brings up that notion of Keith Johnstone's of, we treat the stage like we treat life. And in relationships, since you were talking about the breakups, breaking up's hard, but it's hard for me if I break up with you. It's hard for me personally to go through the grief and the pain of losing the relationship. And in some cases, it's more painful and harder to stay, to be in the relationship. And that's the kind of thing we can move towards in improvisation. Why? Because you and I are not a couple. We can play those moments. Well, not yet, but and we can play those relationships, right?
I love that there's still hope.
I'm an optimist at heart. What can I say?
Yeah.
But it was funny because when we were talking about doing the spoken, when we were first doing it in Berlin with all of us, and and everything was amazing. It was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And I was like, wow, what have we done here? And then I remember our first show after that, which I think was in Hamburg. Kind of the first, we did a couple shows there. The first one kind of didn't go so well. And that notion of what dawned on me in spoken was what had worked in Berlin, because we were working with German improvisers as well, was that we couldn't understand half the stuff that was going on. So we had no idea like where the narrative was or what the story was, because they were improvising in German,
Yeah.
and the audience hopefully got everything, English and German. And then that first show that we did after, when it was just us, we could understand everything. And I felt like, at least for myself, that's when that creative spark came back in of like, oh, I have to make stuff happen, and not trust that, no, it just happens.
Yeah.
And we can just play these scenes and let the audience do what they're going to do with them. And that's the story.
And
Right.
I remember it very similar. I also remember, because we didn't know what was happening in the German scenes. As I recall, some of the audience members saying there were some repeated events that were happening in both scenes,
Right.
and of course we didn't necessarily know that. But what I recall too was sort of, I remember being in the green room before we went out to do the first show, kind of biting our nails, because it went from an 8-person show to a 4-person show.
Right.
So not only could you hear everything that was happening, but it was up to 4 people. So 2 people outside the scene and 2 people in every scene to do it. And it was like, all right, I got to be hyper vigilant. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, I probably should be that way anyway, right? Like, I probably should be as invested in. And I think, and that's to me where it got super, super exciting. And then of course, working with, Amanda and Jill and you was always a joy for me. And, we had so many shows during that tour that I just was, thrilled to be a part of, you know what I mean? And everybody was really, really invested in doing these shows. And they were not, okay, let's beat the hell out of the game, right? It was, let's find, and some of them had a game idea, whether it would be like to follow the object or, whatever it was. But like we had a, I don't know, like in Switzerland, we had the object was in this apartment and nobody was in the apartment. And we did a soundscape for 4 minutes. And people loved it. And so did I. I mean, it was just this wonderful idea of, we don't need to keep doing the same thing over and over again. Let's let it, I think sometimes we forget about the idea of the patterns of, same with music, of like, you want to go up and down, you want to have varied theatrical experience,
Right.
And all of that really pays off if it's done, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's that idea, and you were talking about the apartment scene of, and again, something to try to convey to students is ask yourself what is, right? What is happening right now versus what do I wish was happening right now? Right? And then try to make it happen versus, oh, well, we've got this object on stage. Well, let's just over accept that, And I've seen other things like when we do a thread or red thread, with objects where people like try to move an object that doesn't make sense. Like I remember seeing one, I can't remember where it was, but and in red thread, you follow the object, you don't follow the story. So whenever an object moves, it moves, but you also have the gift of the story. So if it's my watch, probably I'm going to be the main character because I'm not going to lose my watch. If it's a coin, we might follow to a bunch of different stories. And in this case, it was a table in a restaurant. And so to me, the offer of what is we're going to have a series of unconnected 2-person scenes, 3-person scenes, people sitting in a restaurant talking, right? And but then at some point in the middle of this, and again, I can't remember where it was, and maybe that's better. 2 improvisers came in to steal the table, and I was like, who one steals a table? Who breaks into a restaurant to steal a table, right? Doesn't make sense at all. I said, so, play it where it lays. If it's a table, let it be a table. If it's I can't remember if it was in one of the trips to Berlin, they brought that giant gnome that weighed 2 tons or whatever. We couldn't move it. And so it's like, well, we're just going to have to keep the gnome where it is because we can't move it off stage and move back on and do all that stuff. So that became the centerpiece of the show, was just this giant concrete gnome in the middle of the stage, which the audience had brought in during intermission because we said, bring out any object that you want and put it on the stage. And that was the object they picked. So, I mean, it's an idea of going, what's going on in the room, not what's going on in my head. And really owning that. And I think, like when you're talking about those moments of being together and that exchange of energy, I think a lot of it's around that. It's that idea that you and I are in this moment, we're finding something together that, you know, even if I sat down and tried to write it out, I wouldn't write it out because you need all the input from everyone else and the other players. So,
But and the other thing is that striving. You asked sort of what kind of things have I learned along the way. I think one thing that took me a long time to learn is that failure is the greatest part of everything. It's like I wanted every improv show, and I sort of concerned myself with the idea that it'd be great. Well, you know what? The best show I've ever seen in my life has been an improv show, and the worst show I've ever seen in my life has been an improv show. So, but the idea, if we're striving to do these things, then worst case scenario, it'll be I don't know, a bad show. I don't even know. Like if we're striving to do these things and fail,
right.
great. That's the point. And that's what I would say over time. And of course, maybe that is the only way to gain that perspective. But I've been on enough shows that didn't kill, and enough shows that really didn't kill, to know that they don't always have to kill. But instead they can just be. And if they're their own thing, and striving for it to be its own thing, which I always did. I think I kept that in my head. And again, I think that was specifically, I'm grateful for that training at UP of like, let this be its own thing. Don't strive for it to be last week's killer show. Let it always just be, and then trust that it'll be what it's supposed to be, and then walk away
Right.
all right for having made the attempt.
Well, I'm being inclusive with the audience then. It's that idea that, again, something I say all the time is what you really want from your audience is that feeling after the show that they feel it was important that they were there tonight. Rather than like, oh, I could come tomorrow night, I'll see the same show, or I'll, be there. But to give the audience that feeling of, and not even a feeling, but give them the experience of going, no, this show is for you tonight, and it's done, it's gone, and like smoke, it's going to dissipate into the air, and tomorrow will be something different.
And you'll be hungover, audience. Undoubtedly, that will be true. Yeah.
Other forms that you like, or things that you've done that,
I mean, well,
I mean, I'm sure there are a lot, but
there's a ton, yeah. And I mean, spoken is I gotta say, I mean, I could literally talk about that for the next 5 hours. But I really love, and which is a really kind of a polar opposite, is the Christmas Carol. The improvised Christmas Carol. When we did that I love doing it. And when we did it in Connecticut, it was this just crazy, wonderful experience. I mean, we did it, I guess, 2 years in a row, but it was just like so joyful. And it is a complete departure from, I mean, now and now you're sort of building up these characters, and you're really sort of giving them the joy of the story, as well as enough laughter, because they've defined so much. So it's a polar opposite in a lot of ways. But God, I love it, and could watch it every performance, and especially like if you were Jill or Fred or Cratchit, like that kills me. And watching or Scrooge, I'm sorry, be Scrooge, and then like watching Jill be Scrooge and walk around is God damn it, I love it. I love that. I could watch Jill watch paint dry, because she'll make it interesting.
that'll be our next show. We'll be watching Jill watch paint dry.
I'll tell you what, you said if you set that up as sort of a donate and watch online, I bet it would be interesting. That's all I'm saying. So I think that's great. I really, theater sports is a whole other thing, but it's pretty great. And there's a lot, so much to unpack about that too. I mean, that's a lot we could talk about. Found objects, another great thing. The idea that, the object is essentially deciding the narrative. I mean, the actor does things with it, but that you could pin yourself in a corner, and then maybe it's not a corner, maybe it's an opportunity,
Right.
And then the unstructured Harold, and we could talk about that too, because I think there's a lot, I think, that might I don't know. I love that. To me, and you said, what are some of the things you don't like? For me, using the wings for the unstructured Harold, to me, I get it theatrically, but I think it allows the performers the opportunity to disconnect from the piece and be sheltered from the sort of responsibility of it. I do like the back wall for anything like that, because it I think prompts and promotes more vigilance with it, because the fact that it is unstructured, it does require that extra level of attention to it to make sure we're invested in it, because otherwise an unstructured Harold can allow us the opportunity to extract safely from it, you know, and then it becomes more of a montage than an actual unstructured
Right.
Harold of like, what is this piece, you know? But
Okay, John, I'll beg to differ.
I know you will. But get to begging first, and then we'll see what happens.
Which I get what you're saying about the back wall idea,
Yeah.
and like the performer's always on.
Mm.
But for me, simply as a director, I like the use of the wings. Um, well, from a director standpoint, for variety. So I'd love when there's 12 people in a Herald, but everyone's gone and there's one person doing a monologue or two people doing something, and given the space to do that. That being said, I also think it's the responsibility of the improviser off stage to know where they are, which is, oh, I've kind of taken myself out. I've got to find the way to bring myself back in. And that's the move that I don't see a lot of improvisers make. They go off and they go, oh, I'm out. And I don't know how to, how do I get invited back in? It's like, no, you just come out and do it in a transition. So to me, the back wall, while I like it because everyone stays engaged, is also, I don't know, where I beg to differ would be to say that's kind of a lazy move. Because if I'm on stage all the time, then I can't leave, which makes it easier for me.
Yeah,
Then choose to leave and then choose to be back on. But
100%.
right,
You know, but I would say I'm lazy. No, I would say that six one half dozen the other. But it is another hurdle to walk through, a conscious hurdle to walk through. And if I want to be in the moment of this thing, why would I want to put conscious hurdles into as a conscious actor hurdles into the piece when I can simply be a part of it and then take that actor decision out of it and put simply character or idea or motivation, decision,
sure,
and eliminate the rest.
right.
Yeah.
And again, another choice on the part of the improviser. That's why, like we talk about structured herald versus unstructured herald. Unstructured, you kind of have to know that you're playing jazz and do that. Whereas the structured tends to take you down a certain path, and again, lack of a better term, in a way, a lazy path because you're following this certain, you know, repeatable pattern um, every time rather than going again, what is in the room? Like what wants to happen? And how do we do that? You know?
Well, and even a structured herald, I've seen a lot of joyous
Sure.
sort of finding things in the moment, because once you get past, certainly even if you're following a true structure, once you get past that second game, all bets are off, right? And you can really start to bring things in.
Right.
But I've seen things that where I love both. But to your point, and this is where I wholeheartedly agree, is like, what if that arrow is early? Let's follow the arrow early. Let's not worry about what we've constructed, and then make the arrow go into a tree. Let's see what we can find, and if the arrow needs to pivot, let's just follow that weird thing, Or let's let a theme just continue here in the stage while other things go on around it, which I think is less likely, not impossible, but maybe less likely to happen, because we think in a structured herald, ooh, this scene is done, versus, well, the piece isn't, so let's just let this be part of the piece, whatever it is. So,
Sure. Well, it's embracing that notion. And again, I quote Del Close on this, which is improv is the craft of creating art out of nothing but each other, no matter what you're doing.
yeah,
It's not like saying, and Harold's that thing, or this game's that thing, or theater sports is that thing. And, you know, and I know you feel or I'm assuming you feel the same way. I think I know that you feel the same way, which is that beauty, kind of going back to the energy thing of being on stage, not knowing what the hell's going on, not knowing what's going to happen or how it's going to turn out. But you look up and you see two or three faces, you go, I'm in great hands. I'm not worried about this at all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and like, many is the time I've looked up into your eyes and I just thought, what's about to happen is going to be fun regardless of anything, because neither one of us know what's going to happen, but here we go, and that's a joy for me. And there's a lot of performers that I love, that when you get that eye contact, when I look at Alicia or Brandon too, or Greg, when you're looking them in the eye and this is going to happen now, that is just a thrill and a joy. And
right.
and I don't know that you get that. It's you can get it with music, surely, but there's something to be said for. All right, we're not armed with anything. We come out on the stage naked and unafraid, hopefully, or naked and terrified. But let's do it. Let's see where that all leads. Let's jump off the ledge and really trust that net is there together.
Right.
God, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Well, and to me, a beautiful aspect of it, kind of hearkening to what you were talking about earlier, is that sometimes it just doesn't work.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like, oh, all right. That's the way it goes. But, we're not flying a plane or doing brain surgery, so we're okay. Uh,
That's right. That's right. Although, and we could talk about this for another day and a half, but like getting the ego and sort of letting the ego move aside is a challenge, and a good one. So if the only thing you get from improv is a challenge against the ego to move it aside, then you've won,
Yeah. Well, that's most of the work, right? Getting yourself out of the way.
That's everything.
Right, right. So we're gonna wrap up here in a minute or two. But I did want to acknowledge we did get some comments, and Hugh Smith is feeling pretty darn good about his grungy bathroom.
Good.
Maybe you should start a theater.
Yeah, yeah.
There.
Whether he likes it or not, I'm going to start it in this room.
And to Laura, we are. This is recorded. You'll be able to watch it on Facebook again. So thank you for that. And you also made a comment about corporate breakdancing and how corporate influence on all the different art forms. But I can't get corporate breakdancing out of my head.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to see that. And
yeah, right.
Jill Ferris has been watching, so
good.
Jill Ferris. Anything negative about Jill?
Well, I love Jill all the way, all the way. Love you, Jill.
And so when this is all over, you've been working with the Pack Theater, and you're going to go back to that. Or are you going to do something else, or
we'll have to see what's still in existence after this, right? But if the Pack is there, I'll go back to that.
Sure. Right. And what do you think about that? The overall health of the scene in LA? Do you think a lot of places are going to shake out?
Just can't tell. No idea. No idea. Right? UCB is now, not going to probably be. Right. It's who can weather the storm financially. No idea.
Right. Right. And you are, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, thinking about relocating as well.
Possibly. We'll see how that goes.
And I guess if you were to do that, let's fantasize a little bit. Would you see yourself beginning something in a new place or finding something? I mean, I guess a lot of it would depend on where you ended up, but if it was a smallish town, would you want to? Oh, my dog says hello.
I got to go to the bathroom so bad right
now. But could you see yourself once more into the breach? I'm going to start something new and get it going.
Possibly. I mean, I could definitely see teaching for sure, and I'd want to perform no matter where I went. What that looks like, remains to be seen. But that's both true.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, well, you have to go to the bathroom. So
I do, man. So this is a good ending point. It's a great ending point.
we're not pulling over. We're not pulling.
I gotta go. I'm sure there's a sink that I can use in our room, right? You know when I gotta go. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. That was I still think about that story.
Me too.
And just to update everyone, I guess as this is a way to go out.
Yeah,
John
let's
and
go
I,
out.
we were on tour in Europe, and you couldn't find the door, or the door was locked.
I was fucking drunk and the door wasn't part of the equation.
And there happened to be, for some reason, a sink in the middle of the room. Um, and so John decided to go to the bathroom there, and did.
Yeah. And I'm
And
gonna go now. You continue that story. I'm going to the bathroom.
oh, he is. He's going to the bathroom. So there we are. Anyway, I will say thanks to John when he gets back. But I do want to mention that we have shows going on. Wednesday, we have duos. Thursday, we have Wild Card, which is kind of an open improv show. Friday and Saturday, including tonight, we have Campfire, which is where hopefully you, the audience, will be able to share with us some of your experiences with UFOs, recurring dreams, ghosts, haunted houses, but just from your life. I will talk to you for a few minutes. We'll then use those facts from your stories to recreate brand new stories. And we have that coming up. Again, next week we'll have another up close with someone else. And I believe, I don't have it in front of me, so don't quote me on it. We'll have Tobias Ziliakis from Helsinki, Finland, who will be joining me. And that's either next week or the week after. Anyway, we also have classes, as I mentioned before. We have a bunch of hopefully specialty classes coming up. And you can always find out about stuff at unexpectedproductions.org. And again, I know I already mentioned it, but yeah, if you want to watch this again or watch earlier editions of Up Close, feel free to do that here on Facebook. And John's back.
I'm back. Everything's good. Let's go for another hour.
Anyway, I wanted to thank you for doing this. It's been fun catching up, and
I love it, and I'm so glad that we got to connect and talk about this. And I mean, quite honestly, so much that I think and feel about improv, you've inspired, and so many conversations around the table that I wouldn't even have known would have driven so many ideas around improv. So I'm really grateful just to be able to catch up and just to have you in my life. So yeah.
Right. Well, it's good seeing you. And again, hopefully when we're more mobile, we can find a place where we can be around the table again and talk some more. But thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. And everyone, we'll see you guys later.
See you later.